Slovenia. Thomas is taking care of the chat box, so please do not hold yourself back from using that chat box. We will need it later on in the discussion part as well, your inputs. And I see a couple other people here from No Excuse Slovenia, the University of Ljubljana, and Climate, people who are helping this project to make a reality. And the first episode of this webinar series, we're gonna begin with this one. This is a project that is co-financed by the European Climate Initiative and the European Union's EC funding. And the aim of this webinar today is primarily to gather input from our diverse speakers, as well as from our audience, to develop a competence model for climate education in Hungary. That's objective number one. And objective number two is to have a discussion, and to have a discussion on what we can expect from the coming decade of climate action. So why don't we kickstart this and turn to our first speaker. We're gonna have a format with quick questions to each of our speakers. And after that, we're gonna get into a so-called crossfire discussion where anyone from the speakers can give a hand and answer the questions that are up for discussion. And after that, we really hope to get your questions and comments. So our first speaker is Lucija. She is the UN Youth Delegate in Slovenia. And I let you, Lucija, introduce yourself. And here is the first question to you. Who are you, and what are your experiences in your country regarding educational programs of youth groups or NGOs for climate empowerment? Please, Lucija, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Viktor, for the introduction, and I'm very glad to be here today. So maybe for the first part, my name is Lucija Tacer. I'm the UN Youth Delegate of Slovenia this year. Otherwise, I'm a law student here at the University of Ljubljana. And the idea of the UN Youth Delegate program is for member states of the UN to have youth representatives who can represent the priorities of young people in their countries at the UN level, but then at the same time also work at home and try to bring projects, initiatives, and values of the United Nations closer to young people. So I'm doing that here in Slovenia. One of the main initiatives that I'm working on is promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, they encompass climate action. And because that theme is so broad, I have set 3 priorities for the mandate, and those are gender equality, youth participation, and climate action. So I try to focus on those 3 areas and have events, include young people in discussions about those topics. So regarding education and working with schools, I was not able to be at schools a lot this year for obvious health reasons, but I was able to have conversations with many young activists in Slovenia who are doing a non-formal education in schools and outside of them on climate action. So those were some interesting discussions. I started off the mandate with sustainable development talks, where I talked to different youth activists on fields of sustainable development goals. As you may know, many of them are either directly or indirectly related to climate action. So it was really interesting to hear what kind of initiatives they have, but also how much peer-to-peer work they're doing. And a lot of them identify that really that peer-to-peer component is very helpful in learning about these topics. So I heard some organizations mentioned, and a lot of those were also part of my talks, like No Excuse and Institute for Health and Environment Slovenia, and also Youth for Climate Justice. They were part of it. So those were some good experiences and some active efforts in Slovenia. Then I also hosted round table discussions with young people on the key priority areas. So one of them was about climate change. And that was a very interesting discussion because it included youth with different backgrounds. So we had social sciences represented and natural sciences, and it was very interesting to hear and also see that people were engaged, asking questions on even through social media platforms. And then maybe the last thing I would point out with my activity on this field is a recent collaboration. I was contacted by an organization called Exena here in Slovenia, and they have a project called Let's Be Eco Cool, and it focuses on children primarily and also youth, and to basically promote climate protection and preservation through education. And they asked me to contribute to their publication, which they're making for educators about how important it is to include and prioritize these topics in education. So maybe that's a little bit from my side for the beginning, and I hand back to you, Viktor.
Thank you, Lucia. This is an interesting side of the discussion, as you are a kind of a middle actor between civil society as well as the public sector. So let's see another viewpoint from Isabel. Isabel is from CliM'Aid Austria, and as said, the wider goal of this discussion is to learn, for example, from your Austrian example, to build this comprehensive picture about what is accessible and what is missing when it comes to developing a competence model for education. So Isabel, please introduce yourself and tell us, what have you experienced with schools in your country when it comes to non-formal education?
Yes, thank you. I'm very grateful to be speaking here today. So my name is Isabel Zangerl, and I study environmental and bioresource management in Vienna. And I'm a part of CliM'Aid Austria. And we have 4 different projects, and one of them is called CliM'School. And I am the project lead of that. And what we do is we go to schools and universities, and we have 2-hour workshops there about climate politics, the climate crisis in general, but then we also do a UN climate conference simulation game where we try to get the students really interested and interactive and actually engage in the whole game and not just have it like a frontal experience for them. Yeah. And what we try is to encourage students to think more globally and to actually, or to make these really complex connections. Sometimes when you think of global politics, it's already enough to think about national ones. So actually teaching them about what is the UN friends, what they do there, why it's so important, especially for young people, and why it's important for them to know more and to actually speak up and to get involved. So that is our main goal when we have these workshops. And I've been with this organization or with this NGO for 2 years now. And like Lucia also said, it was a little bit different this year compared to last year. We also have our workshops online now, so that's also a different experience, but it still works. And mostly what I've experienced is that schools are very open to people coming, or external people coming to school to take up like 2 hours of their time. The most important thing I've realized when organizing and working with teachers from schools is to tell them what we need and to make it as easy as possible for them, so that we don't we tell them there is no preparation that they have to do. The only thing that we need is 2 hours and their students and a room. And that's the most important part, so that they know they don't have to prepare their students, to not give them any more work than they already have. And often the feedback that we get is from the teachers is that they really enjoyed it, which is I'm very glad about, but that they want more information, or that they want our information, like our PowerPoints or additional information we might have. So it's good to come prepared and to get the emails of the teachers often, and to share the knowledge that we've gathered, and then share them with the teachers. And something I think is very important to do with the students is to debrief them, especially if you speak about climate change or the climate crisis, is to reflect with them, to talk about what we just learned, what we discussed, to give them space for any feelings or ideas they have on their own, to not just blast them with information and then leave, but to actually help them digest what they what we've just talked about for the past hour or hours. And yeah, what else did I want to say? I think what's important is also how you contact schools or universities. It's a lot of self-promotion, a lot of contacting the schools or the universities yourself, and then word of mouth, it travels on, which is great. And we do a lot of it online, and also through the Fridays for Future movement. Teachers for Future have established. So there's this network is growing, and it's really good to be a part of that and to be involved in that. And yeah, I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Isabel, for sharing these insights. It's not a secret that I also worked on this simulation game a lot, and yes, it's a very interactive game that you can bring into a classroom, and instead of the old-fashioned or traditional way of lecturing, it's a way when students can really do role play and experience climate change science through role play. And what you said when it comes to contacting schools and getting in touch with the school and getting the trust of teachers and the school faculty to go in the school and have their classes, I think that's one thing that we really need to get when it comes to our competence model that we are developing here in Hungary. So thanks for these insights. And the next speaker is Blaž, who is a climate scientist and a climate communicator. And I'd like to ask you, Blaž, to tell us who you are and what, from your experience, what proved to be effective in communicating climate change science, and what proved to be effective when it comes to presenting opportunities for climate action for young generations and young people. Please.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Viktor, for having me here. As a researcher, it's always good to come back down from our ivory tower and have a little bit of a different audience, a little bit more sort of an audience where maybe we can even have some impact and try to sort of change something and move something on climate science. So my daily work is really trying to study how the clouds form, how they evolve, how those clouds will change with climate change. That's what I do most of the time. I just came from 3 years in Seattle in the US, where I studied some of those clouds, and I am very new now to Vienna, just moved here and spending my 5 days of quarantine these days here. Yeah, but besides that, so besides being a scientist, I actually started being interested in climate from maybe actually an youth activist perspective. We started a long time ago in Slovenia with No Excuse Slovenia, projects on sustainable development and on climate change. And similarly to climates in Austria, we were also going a lot to schools and communicating either the broader sustainability topic or more focused on the climate change issues and so on. Now, that changed maybe a little bit for myself personally, because in the meantime I became an expert. Now I have maybe a bit of a different role. I have more of a role of overlooking some activities and helping the activists to sort of address the right issues and do some fact checking. And just recently, we put together a nice brochure on climate change called What the Fuck is Climate Change, which I just want to quickly actually show you if we would be able to screen share it. I think I don't have the right to do so. Tomasz, can you?
Yeah, you have the right now. You got
okay, it. Perfect. Good. So now there we go. So since actually quite some time, we've been working together with No Excuse and with some other organizations, with Viktor too, to put together, some basic information about climate change accessible for young people. As Isabel said, it's nice to not only talk about it, but also have something prepared for them to share. It's nice to have it at one place, because even though these days you find all of this material online, it's still nice to have it in some sort of understandable, digestible way in one PDF document. So this, however, today maybe it's a bit different, the situation compared to from 10 years ago or so. So to be fair, I think many of young people that we talk to already know a lot about climate change, and that's why we try to make something that is interesting both for those that don't know much about climate change as well as those that know quite a lot about it. And that's why this publication starts with some sort of a quiz where you kind of see how far you can come with your knowledge on climate change. And then based on that, you go and you can start reading from the beginner, intermediate, or the expert level, where if I just show you a few examples, the beginner here starts really pretty basic with what is, in my opinion, really very important from the technical aspect, at least, to communicate to the people, to let them know that what is the difference between weather and climate, and so on. There we see also the greenhouse effect, and so on and so on. So sort of the basics. And then if we move from the basics, we start, okay, we see some polar bears and Arctic and so on, but then sort of try to communicate to the youth in particular, how do we get to those temperature projections, and how, for example, climate changes already in the past millennia actually influence some of our society. Here on the example of the Dust Bowl in the 30s in the US, trying to communicate that we may need a stable climate if we want to thrive as a society, until getting to the advanced level, talking more about game theory or about the prisoner's dilemma, and ultimately climate negotiations, and the importance of the UNFCCC process. I think the brochure itself can't be sort of the only, sorry, stop share. It can't be the only way with which you communicate climate science these days. It's still much more effective if you go somewhere, you talk to the audience, but it's also good to have something on which you base your lectures or your thoughts, and kind of increase your credibility in that way. Now, I think what is also important when you communicate science or climate change to any audience is really to try to understand, to try to get to know your audience. I mean, you'll not approach in the same way a group of businessmen from Texas as a group of kids from Hungary, let's say. And you have to really understand what your target group cares about, and based on that, you try to shape your message. That's one tip that I would give. And there's another very important tip that it's somewhat overlooked often. I think we should all avoid fear. Fear is not good for motivating us to take action. And I think ultimately we want everybody to be more active in this field. Fear was designed to escape from a bear or something like that, to run away from troubles, not to really tackle the problem. So instead of talking about fear and focusing about fear, I think we should really focus and talk about solutions. Yeah, so that would be my sort of three key points in climate communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Blaž, and also thanks for. I really find this last point that you said important. Talking about fear and talking about apocalyptic messages. Another thing I saw recently a meme from MIT that says science shows that showing people science doesn't work, and that was a takeaway from me. I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate or is the truth, but I think the takeaway message from this is that, like in the brochure, we need to bring some examples, some real life examples to people, and also shine light on the opportunity side. And actually, in the end of this brochure, in 25 points, we collected all the things that people can do. What can you do? What can you do for climate action? And I think you said it well, that getting away from the apocalyptic message and going to the opportunity and the science message, like what are the facts? What are the myths? And what are the facts? Okay, thank you. And at this point, we have reached or ended the first part, or the first objective of our webinar. And now we're going to move on to the Crossfire discussion. So the Crossfire discussion will have 3 questions, and we're just going to go one by one. And all of you, all the speakers, you are free to answer the question or have a comment about it, or have a comment of the other speakers' response. Just make sure to either put your hands up in the camera, or raise your hand in the Zoom app if you like it. So the first question, what do you think will trigger the large-scale behavior change in our societies? What will be the change? Is it going to be maybe formal or non-formal education, what we just talked about and elaborated on? Is it the media? Is it the natural disasters, the crisis situations, these apocalyptic messages? What brings the large-scale behavior change?
Well, if nobody wants to say, I can say something. I guess it's a combination of those factors. I think I just wanted to make the connection with what we're experiencing right now with COVID, right? It's a crisis. It's an unusual situation. And we changed the way we work, we communicate. And I hope some of these positive changes that COVID brought will be also used in future. So we are sort of already maybe beyond this, or partially we already may have done some of the changes in the sense that we will limit our business travel, we will limit our travel for work and do more work from home, and there's a lot of benefits in doing that, and not only climate benefits, but indeed also some other benefits in terms of saving some time and money and so on. So this is just like a small example, but I think there's much more to say about that.
All right. Any of the other speakers, do you want to comment on what Blaž said or the initial question? Please go ahead.
I can add something. So I agree, it probably is going to be a mixture of all of those, because we're so many different people and different methods work for different people. So I think the best bet probably is to have multiple outlets, informal education, also through media, to really try to get the idea out there. But I thought what was interesting, once we had this discussion at some youth delegate conference, the idea of making it a culture and how actually that social pressure will really be very effective, because it'll feel right to be working towards climate action, so that you also have some sort of internal motivation. That will obviously take generations and a long time, and all of those factors that Viktor and Blaž have mentioned will contribute. But I think, yeah, once it'll become a part of the culture is when it will really be effective.
Thanks.
I think we all agree then. When I was thinking about the question, I also thought it's always, or what makes the biggest impact, it's seen when the impact hits, but not what happens before. So I think it's so important that in every single sector and even if we talk about just climate and climate organizations, that we have very different people doing different things, because like Lucia said, everyone's so different. And what Blaž said before, that you need to speak, or you need to know who you're speaking to. So I think it will definitely be a combination of many things. And one of the things I think it's a slogan that Clemens once had, is like, you make like climate activism cool. In German, it kind of works a little bit better. But yeah, so the lifestyle, especially for young people, I think if it is a trend, people will hop on and hopefully then see the deeper meaning, and not just do it because everybody else is doing it. But at first, I'm happy when a lot of people join and then find the purpose, or the other way around, as long as people hop on the train.
If I may make a conclusion of the things that you brought up, I think something that you brought up with the COVID-19 crisis, Blaž, well, already what we've seen in of the economic recession. There was, I don't know how many of you followed that, the drop of oil. It was, of course, not just an effect of COVID, but all the circumstances around it. And I think already that thing is something really remarkable in 2020. The drop of the price of oil has dropped, and at the same time we see a much quicker growth in renewable energy than what was expected before, and at the same time you brought up, Lucija, culture. We know that cultures change. People change, societies change. They adapt new cultures, and this year I think has changed some of our habits, maybe for the long run. And I also think that this year a lot of people, civil society, have also become more active as a citizen when it comes to informing others about public health measures, when it comes to reminding others for public health measures. So I also think it's a combination of these things: crisis situations, media, and education, of course. Okay, so this leading us to the next question of this Crossfire discussion. Do you expect a visible change in the coming decade? Please. Yes, Isabel, please.
I'll start off. I think through the year, we've just had a lot of problems that have been in our world for a long time, have really bubbled up to the surface. And I think it has been a year, at least for the people close to me, of deep reflection and looking at what is actually happening and actually seeing things for how they are. So yes, I do expect things to change, and I try to not just expect them to change, but also to demand the change that I think is necessary. So to stay active and to keep engaging and fighting for what I think is right. And I think it's a good time now, because lots of people are, I don't know how people say, like, waking up, but I guess like these things have already been here for a long time, but I think people are just seeing clearly now, and to use that momentum and demand the change that we want. I think it's a good time.
Yes, a reaction to this point or the initial question?
I can follow up. Oh, sorry, Blaž, would you like to?
You can. I just wanted to open up a new topic, so you should probably continue first if it's more connected.
Okay. I don't have a lot. I mean, I hope so. I don't have very concrete reasons for believing that there will be visible change, but there are positive trends. And I recently had an interview with the former EU Commissioner for Slovenia, and she works a lot, Violeta Bulc, on the concept of eco-civilization. And I think she brought up a good point of not a lot of, skeptics are pointing out that some of the initiatives that we have now are not feasible, but that is like thinking in the closed mindset of now and not taking into account all of the development and the positive changes that are happening in our capacities for finding green solutions. So that makes me hopeful, and I hope that, yes, that we see a visible change in the coming years.
So I would say that we're already seeing much more. I'm much more optimistic today than I was 5 or 10 years ago. I can see that already by looking at the old drafts of this publication that we wrote some time ago. They are too pessimistic from my today's perspective, and actually besides the protest and the visibility of climate change that we're mentioning a lot. There's simply, as also Viktor already alluded before, these days much more financial interest to invest in green technology. That did not look that positive 10 years ago. These days, I mean, the so-called business as usual scenario will not get there because it's not profitable to make coal power plants nowhere in the world. today, really, it's the renewable energy that is just getting much more economic compared to the non-renewable energies. I mean, of course, it will take a while to make this transition. And the problem, we still have a problem. And the problem is that if we want to keep within some reasonable climate risks, we should make this transition super quick. This is challenging, but I think the trend goes in the right direction, and there is already, you could call it, there is already the climate self-interest into that. You know, consulting companies would tell you that you should invest in sort of renewables and green business and so on, and in International Energy Agency, that is sort of a super conservative organization, change their forecast for energy future dramatically in favor of renewables. So the trend changed really dramatically in the last few years. And yeah, it might not be enough for 2 degrees goal by Paris Agreement, or even less than 2 degrees, but the trend goes in the right direction.
I also believe there is a couple of things that that makes it realistic to be hopeful and be an optimist. As you mentioned just now, the business as usual scenario, business as usual. We if some of you might not be familiar with this term, the business as usual scenario in climate science is when basically nothing happens, when no policies, no civil behavior changes done, and we just continue to emit. That's the business as usual. The forecast has changed. The forecast has changed recently. I think with the current NDCs, the current policies in place, and the ambition in place, we are no longer heading toward that steep +4 degrees change. And I would be happy if anyone would challenge this argument in this conversation. And another thing, as it was brought in, the engagement of civil society. And if I may share a tweet from Climate Interactive. Do you see the graph? Yes, so this graph is from last year, and it shows the number of people at climate protests. And I think many of us still remember that September 2020 climate protest, which was the peak of this engagement. And I think most of us were there in our own countries and cities. And I think this gives a good picture of how civic engagement is going up and going in the right direction. And of course, these are just the people who go out to the street and let their voices be heard. But there are many others who tacitly agree, but don't take it to the street. Fair enough. Okay, when it comes to the next question of the Crossfire Discussion, is if you could highlighting one thing that the world governments or people need to do to accelerate climate action until 2030, what would that one thing be? Please.
All right, I start again. So post-COVID green recovery plans, we know that if we would just 10% of all that money invest in the energy transition and low carbon society, we might be able to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. There's some study from Vienna showing that recently in Science. So I would say we should really push that our governments make sure that whoever gets this COVID recovery money is really striving for you know, different way of doing, and not business as usual, but sort of more with a sustainable, renewable society on the back of the mind.
Maybe I can add, yes, I definitely agree with that. That's the first thing I thought of, the code recovery money, because in Slovenia had some discussions about that. And pointing out that we don't have the same responsibilities. Obviously, governments have a different kind of responsibility than everyday people, but we can all contribute, and it's important to keep your governments accountable. So on that note, I find it interesting, this trend of suing your governments for not reaching climate action goals and how successful it has been. So that's an interesting thing that I think of here. But one thing to highlight, is very hard. I can't think of a specific one.
I agree, just focusing on one is hard since it's such a complex topic. And I like the point that, or what we've heard a lot is that normal was a crisis, that we shouldn't go back to normal, and that it's important how we transition out of COVID and what happens next. And that it's, like I said before, it's a good time to build up new things since, or right now, I guess. And yeah, so the question, if I would highlight one thing to accelerate climate action, it's so hard, but I think from what I do with youth empowerment, we've this a lot, but I think just generally empowering people to know that they have a voice and they can use it in whichever way they want, and to also talk about or think that climate activism goes hand in hand with social justice activism, and that we don't forget that the climate crisis is a systematic problem, and that we see the roots of the problem and not just what it takes with it, but actually how deep it is in our society.
I would just add that, so not to be only flower power. I mean, I have a big, there's a big danger, in my opinion, with all this activism and everything that we all do, and we do in good faith. But coming from America, from a state, Washington State, not Washington D.C. That's a totally different part of the U.S., northwest corner. The country is polarized. You have like. You know, people with one political view thinking one thing and being very strongly believing in that, and people, so Democrats thinking one thing and Republicans thinking the other thing. And the best predictor of what you think about climate change is your political affiliation. And I think we should prevent that from happening to that extent in Europe. I mean, it is happening already. It's hard to totally avoid it, but I think we should really think how to reach a broader group of people instead of just trying to make a war between two worldviews. Climate change will affect everyone, not only, you know, people with left liberal worldviews. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really challenging task, but we should try to reach out to everyone, and particularly to the rural communities, I would say.
Okay, so all of you highlighted somewhat of a different area and thing, and if I may conclude this, correct me if I interpreted them not in the right way. So you said something, Blaž, you said something about recovery plans and investments. So following the money. Where does the money go? Overseeing where investments go. Do they go in the right direction or in the wrong direction, in dirty fossil fuels? And just keeping an eye whether we are in the position to see these things, or whether we're just individuals who spend every day on everyday things, seeing where our spendings go. Unfortunately, a lot of our spending still go into dirty fossil fuels, because it's the most, until today, it's one of the most returning investments. Even just, and we elaborate on this in the brochure that was earlier mentioned, that even the pension schemes, where our pension goes, a lot of these pension schemes, they still invest into fossil fuels. The banks, where we're keeping our money, many of them turn this money into fossil fuels instead of other renewable sources. So okay, cutting it shorter, follow the money. Second, Lucia's point, holding our elected representatives accountable, making sure that their promises are being withheld, and if not, they are faced with these issues through litigation. We see a lot of people take their countries, their elected governments to court. So holding our elected representatives accountable. And then third, going to Isabel's point, empowering people to let their voices heard, but also systemic change. And I think this is also a viewpoint where it proves that climate change really needs. We need to look at climate change through a multi-solving lens. It's really not just one thing that will solve it. It's not just renewable energy that will solve it. It's not just fossil fuels. It's a combination of many things. And some of these things need a systemic change. And then there was an extra point here added by Blaž. We can tie it into any of these main three if we want, is not to politicize climate change as we see it in the US. Not letting political parties or political spectrums to own this topic, and the other one to the others to dispose it. And the US is probably a great example for this. And the funny thing is that often it's really just the messaging. It's really just the messaging, how these messages are pushed out. Maybe to conservative person in the United States, if one says climate change, the popularity drops. But if you say clean energy, clean transportation, there's much more interest. Why? A lot of people would not refuse clean energy. What's the problem with clean energy? But clean energy for climate change? That's and I think you are making a fair point with not letting this in Europe to happen. This polarization to happen. Any points that you would like to take on, or any comments on these things, on the highlights?
You did a great job summing up and systemizing our answers.
Thanks. I'm trying my best, and we have a lot of participants here, and I'm not sure if I just don't see your questions and comments, or you really post anything, but please, this is also the point where the inputs of the Julia Julia, I see you have something to say about the last questions. Can we give the floor to Julia?
Okay, nice to meet you all. And that question was very interesting because I've been working with some volunteers here in my hometown. I'm living in Italy. And with them, we worked about food waste, pollution, and climate change. And I think, in my opinion, thinking also about the situation we have in Italy, that we often blame the government, which means that if something wrong happens, okay, let's blame the government, but citizens don't want to say, okay, we are responsible too. So in my opinion, a way to improve and to reach the climate change goals is about not to ignore and to have empathy. But first of all, citizens. I mean, anytime, I don't know, in simple stuff, in everyday stuff, not to waste food, not to waste garbage. Nowadays, for example, the streets are full of masks. But why? I mean, we have so many trash bins and we can use them. So what the most important thing, in my opinion, is not to ignore, but also to be responsible, to say, okay, it's my responsibility as a citizen, and not only the government. I don't know about your countries, but here in Italy, every time something wrong happens, let's blame the government all the time. And citizens don't want to have the responsibility. So in my opinion, and listening to you guys and thinking about the situation here in Italy, this is my humble opinion, I would say. I have no knowledge, so much knowledge about climate change and climate actions, less than you, of course. But I also wanted to share this because sometimes I feel very hopeless, and I would really find some hope also from you.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
I think you're making a fair point, because often experts often tend to only think about systems, only think about government, only think about the economic solutions, but we know that that this change needs a lot of individual action, and without the individual action, governments won't do what we ask for. They won't do what they know they should be doing. And one thing, and I go curving back to the COVID year and what we've learned, what the world has learned through this. I think being an active citizen, in whatever that is, and whatever, if that's sustainability focused, if that's socially focused, but basically caring about the society, caring about your community, caring about your country. And coming back to the brochure, in the brochure, in 17 points, we tried to collect things that people can do in their own lives, what people can change. And I'm talking here from saving energy in your household to informing others by holding group discussions, by organizing a webinar, or by just looking out what kind of products are energy efficient, what kind of products are incredibly polluting. Individual change. Anyone else has something connecting to this or anything else that you would like to add?
Yes, thank you, Julia, so much for your point of view, because it definitely was not emphasized enough. And Viktor, I love that you brought up active citizenship. In my conversations on sustainable development, I feel like every time at the end of it, it comes to active citizenship, no matter what you're talking about. But yes, this individual responsibility is very important. And thinking about it now, maybe in Slovenia, we may take it for granted a little bit, because I do think that we have, it's not perfect, obviously it can be improved, but in general, it's pretty good, especially comparing to the US, where I've traveled to multiple times. I'm usually shocked when I cross the border and there are no recycling bins anywhere, or just so many water bottles at every, and so much trash at every point in your journey, I feel like. So that is definitely probably a perspective that we can take to emphasize that each, not only country, but each kind of region has a different approach. There's probably not just one best way to address it in globally, right? So yes, where that kind of awareness is lacking, government action will not be able to accomplish as much. I agree.
I would say that, add that we should definitely, I mean, this is definitely a good point from Julia and the follow-up. We should just not go down too far this sort of a slippery slope, because the industry, which after all is still the major pollutant, is exactly trying to increase our climate guilt. And it's great. We have to, like, my personal carbon footprint comes mainly from flying, and I try to cut on that, and I think I did to some extent even before COVID. But even if I do everything that is in my power, we'll still have at least out there that is a little bit beyond the direct power. I mean, maybe sort of through the, you know, forcing some pension funds to divest from fossil fuels and so on, but that's already then going in the advocacy direction, active citizenship, if you want to.
I would also like to add that I agree that it's dangerous to say just politics has to do something, or just citizens, and that it's a shared but different responsibility, and that we should acknowledge that and see, for example, if like it makes a much bigger difference if an industry stops, or a company stops polluting, compared to if I reduce my meat intake, because I'm just one person at a huge company, and obviously that might be a very like or to think about, okay, yeah, that it makes a difference if it's just me alone, or if it's a bigger company or politics that have a lot of impact, or really fast direct impact, I guess. Right, something else I want to say. Oh yeah, that actually in our everyday lives, and or how do we affect our environment every day, and then we tell them to start with something that's easiest for them. Really easy for somebody to stop buying fast fashion products, make clothes on their own because they know how to, or they like to go secondhand shopping. Just to start with something that's easiest for you, to change a habit that's not a big deal, and to go from there, and to always say that nobody's perfect, and that just because I come to your school doesn't mean that I am perfect in every way, and that because I think that's that really stops people from talking about it, because as soon as you say, oh yeah, I think climate action is great, then they're like, well, do you fly, do you eat meat? And I think this really unproductive conversation starts. So I like what Julia said about having empathy and leaving space for people, and making sure that we understand that we share the earth, and that we share, or that we can have different opinions. Yeah, I don't know how to conclude my train of thought.
Yeah, and if I may connect this one to climate education in schools, some of the projects that you brought up, the CliM'School project, the UN Youth Delegate program, and how it engages young people. These are all non-formal ways to do education, and a couple of things that I experienced with playing these simulation games and having workshops at schools is that when teachers like it, when teachers like the approach, when they like the tool, they ask for it, and they might do it their own, and they might build it into their own curricula, which makes this non-formal approach into a formal approach. Of course, you could argue if it's a formal approach, if it only comes from the teacher, it should maybe come from the education system, the educational curricula, that climate change would be embedded in national school curriculums. Is anyone here, including the speakers, as well as from the audience, who has experience or has heard about climate change in formal education systems?
I was actually looking this up when I was preparing for this talk. Because I'm not an education expert, so I didn't know all the curricula, but I was interested. So in Slovenia, from what I have seen, it is about 5 years old. So hopefully nothing drastic has changed. But based on how I'm following, I don't think so. There is some content on sustainability and climate action that should be included, but from the report I was reading, it is not a class itself. It's included in other regular courses, which is interesting, and I'm not sure if that's good or it would be better to have it separated. But I would connect it to active citizenship as we have before, because from what I know, in other countries, there are like government and active citizenship classes as a class itself. And in Slovenia, we don't have that, or schools do, they're an exception. And so that's that is a class where climate action could be a big component, and it's like a semi-independent part.
Thanks for sharing that insight. Does anyone else have experience? Did you hear about climate change in your curricula, or heard in another country which is not yours?
Can I maybe go? Do you hear me?
Please, please.
Yeah. So I'm a student of pedagogics, which is basically education in a lot of different forms and perspectives, and also a sociology student. And I had like a practice, so I had to go to school and talk to teachers and see how they're working on things. And I'm also like an activist, no excuse activist. Of course, I also asked about climate education. And they had a teacher that was really involved, like actively involved in educating the children, of course. But what I found interesting was the connection with the like natural water resources. I don't know, what? How do you call that? So like the water that is given to the citizens. So it's a company, and it's a company that made like this action plan, and they gave it to different elementary schools in that region. So it was a really good connection between a local company, school, and of course, like, an active teacher. So I think that's a really good plan for success, so that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think we didn't really speak about the private sector today. And your example ties it in, how the private sector can come in between the citizen, between the government or the nation state, and I'm very optimistic about many of the top companies, the Fortune 500 companies that have commitments for renewable energy, and climate plans, climate goals, but also the smaller inventions, the startups. There is a lot of funds being directed to this direction, green startups, renewable startups, or just having sustainability embedded in their business plans. Maybe in this direction, does anyone has anything to share in regard of this, or anything else? Thanks for bringing it in.
I don't really have much to share. I guess wanted to react on the fact, and I guess share the experience in the country, because for us, I'm from Lithuania, we don't really have such things in the formal system. We don't have any curriculars that are, to be honest, even remotely connected to the ecology and all of those things. And I think that the conversation is really non-existent that much, even though as a country we seem like we're quite aware of the issues, but we don't have anything that is actually teaching our kids, like the younger generation, about the awareness and the consciousness of the climate change, and like how we are affecting it, which is kind of sad. And I'm happy to it's happening in other countries, reflecting on the fact that we don't have it and it's really lacking. So that's the only thing that I wanted to share.
Do you think it would be possible to bring it in a non-formal way?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that. I think that at the moment that's the only way to do it, to start it in a formal way, to lead some kind of sessions and workshops and stuff like that. That's why I'm basically here to hear like ideas and stuff like that, that we can implement something afterwards, maybe later on. But yeah, it's like small steps, and I think that the youth organizations is the primary source of this right now here.
Yeah, I think you are, or Lithuania is not alone with this issue, and this is why we are trying to this is what we're trying to do here in Hungary through this project, the Sustainaware project, is to build this universal competence model that youth NGOs, youth organizations can use to go and do informal climate education, so that it would be easier for youth NGOs also to adopt a toolkit, adopt a curricula, which is already developed in this competence model. And we've come to the conclusion that there is quite a few youth organizations doing this type of work, education, but they differ a lot, and it's also difficult for them. Most youth groups have volunteers. Volunteers come and go, right? And it's difficult to have this universal way of teaching. So this is what we got our hands into, and it's great to hear from other countries, I think, which have similar issues to Hungary's case, for example. Thanks. Okay, from the audience or from the speakers, any further remarks?
I'm just curious, what do you think, or anyone, is the knowledge of young people these days about climate change? Because indeed they are hearing about it. So I'm just curious, yeah, where do you start when you go to school? At what level?
Yep. Beginner, intermediate, or expert? What are you?
I would say, yes, I would say that young people and also kids are very informed about everything. But at the same time, I think it's only a feeling that we all probably have, because in a society that we have today, the knowledge is very accessible, and we feel that we know everything about everything because we can just Google and we will know. Also, I do a lot of different workshops in different fields, and usually when we talk about sustainability, they say, oh yes, we know about this. But if you ask them, okay, explain why this is not okay, then they don't know the answer, because they don't have the vocabulary to talk about it. And also because they don't actually know it, like scientists know about this. So I think that's a big problem of society today. Everything that we know about, we don't actually know about, if you know what I mean. We don't actually have it embedded in ourselves, and it doesn't formate a subject in that way.
I like the way you put it. Things that we think we know, but we don't know. It's like knowing that we could Google it anytime, so we think we know it. And I'm sure that younger generations do have this issue. It's the area of information is endless. But regarding the question of Blaž, where do we start? What's your experience? Younger generations today, teenagers in school, how much do they know? Do you have experience with this? All right, maybe a tough question. That's one of the things that we want to find out with this competence model for climate education in Hungary. Okay, we are approaching the top of the hour, and even though we had this webinar scheduled until 4, I think we got a good participation and a good input from all of you. So thank you very much for that. We really appreciate and value your inputs. And as said earlier on, this webinar is being recorded, so you can rewatch, share it anytime. And also, this is just the first episode of a webinar series, and it started today with the first episode, and it's gonna go on every 2 weeks from now on. And the next webinar will take place in 2 weeks on the 17th of February, and you can see this on Facebook. We upload the events. If you like this one and if you want to join the next one, check our Facebook channel and check the Sustainaware project. We will upload the What the Fuck is Climate Change brochure as well that we mentioned earlier on. And yeah, this project was co-financed by the European Climate Initiative, as well as the European Union's ECDIR funding. And it was nice to have you. Thank you for all of you for coming.